He was alone at the altar when his perfect world crumbled. Jake Thompson, 33, was one of Chicago's most promising tech entrepreneurs. The owner of a software company that developed innovative systems for hospitals, Jake had achieved everything he'd set out for: success, recognition, and a life of total comfort. This Saturday in June should have brought him the final piece: happiness beside Chloe, his girlfriend of 3 years. But Chloe never showed. St. Michael's Cathedral was packed. Over 200 guests filled the dark wood pews, whispering nervously as they checked their phones and watches. Jake stood before the priest in his perfectly tailored gray suit, his hands clammy. 40 minutes had passed beyond the agreed-upon time. Outside, Lila Sanchez was pushing her cleaning cart across the church parking lot. At 30, she'd spent 6 years working as a cleaner for event venues since moving from rural Texas to Chicago for a better life. This wedding was just another gig, a 100 payday for tidying up after the reception. Lila parked her cart near the side entrance and noticed the strange commotion. People were streaming out of the cathedral, looking confused. A man in a black suit was on his phone, talking loudly and anxiously. "She's not coming. She texted to say she can't go through with it. She's not sure." Lila felt a pang of sympathy. Though she didn't know the couple, the situation resonated. She knew what it was like to doubt yourself, to back out of a crucial decision. Inside, Jake finally stepped down from the altar. His best man, Matt, rushed over, phone in hand. "Jake, a text came in. She says she loves you but can't marry you today. She needs time to think." Jake took the phone and read Chloe's words. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. 3 years of dating, a year of planning, all collapsing in seconds. "What do I do now?" Jake asked, more to himself than to Matt. "Call it off. Tell the guests. There's no other way." But Jake looked around. He saw his mother, Mrs. Evelyn Thompson, seated in the front row, tears in her eyes. He saw cousins who'd flown in from Miami, business partners, and most importantly, the American investor he'd specially invited, Richard Cooper, a Toronto who valued stability and family. Suddenly, something inside Jake snapped. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was the certainty that everything he'd worked for could crumble. Richard had already expressed doubts about closing the crucial $5 million contract. A scandal like this would be the perfect excuse for him to walk away. Jake dashed out the side door, desperate for air. That's when he saw Lila. She was crouched by her cart, organizing cleaning rags. She wore jeans, white sneakers, and a simple t-shirt, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Jake stopped observing her, then without thinking of the consequences, he approached. "Are you an employee here?" he asked. Lila stood up, surprised. "Yes, sir. I'm the cleaner hired for after the party." Jake took a deep breath, his heart hammering. "How much are you getting paid today?" Lila frowned. $100. Why?" "I'll pay you $50,000. Right now," Jake said, his voice trembling. "If you walk in there with me and pretend to be my bride." Lila took a step back, thinking she'd misheard. "Are you kidding me?" "I'm not. My fiancé just stood me up at the altar. But I need this wedding to happen, at least in front of the guests. We'll sort it out later, but right now I need you to save me." Lila looked at him as if he were insane. "Sir, I can't do that. That's crazy." $100,000, Jake pleaded, desperation etched on his face. "You don't have to do anything but walk down the aisle, listen to the priest, and sign a paper. We'll annul it tomorrow. But today, I need you to save me." Lila felt her head spin. $100,000 was more than she made in an entire year. It was the money she needed to pay for the mounting medical debts for her younger brother, Leo, who'd had a motorcycle accident 6 months ago. "Please," Jake insisted. There was something genuine in his terror. "I know this is insane. I know it's wrong, but I promise it won't hurt you. I just need to get through this." Lila looked at the cathedral, then at Jake, then at her own hands calloused from hard work. And then, against all logic, she said, "Okay, but I get half the money now." 15 minutes later, Lila was locked in the sacristy restroom, squeezing into a wedding dress that wasn't hers. Matt had managed to borrow a gown from a cousin who'd married last month. It was white, simple, with lace on the shoulders. It didn't fit Lila perfectly, but it was good enough to pass in the rush. "Are you sure about this?" asked one of the wedding planners, a woman named Lisa, who'd been convinced by a frantic story about a last-minute misunderstanding and the real bride arriving via the back entrance. Lila looked at herself in the mirror, not recognizing the woman staring back. She, who cleaned churches, was now dressed as a bride in one of them. "I already said yes," she replied, not entirely honestly. Lisa adjusted the veil over Lila's hair. "You just have to walk out there, stand by him, and say 'I do' when the priest asks. That's it." Lila took a deep breath. She thought of Leo, of the surgery he needed. She thought of the absurd amount Jake had promised. She'd already checked her phone 3 times. 50,000 was in her account. Outside, Jake was explaining to the guests that there was a slight delay due to a mix-up with the limo, but everything was resolved. His mother, Evelyn, looked at him suspiciously. "Jake, what's going on? Where is Chloe?" "She's here, Mom. Just a slight hitch. Everything's fine." Evelyn didn't look convinced but returned to her seat. The music swelled. Pachelbel's Canon in D, Lila's legs trembled as the cathedral doors swung open. Every face turned toward her. She began to walk. Each step felt like an eternity. Holding a hastily assembled bouquet of white roses, Lila tried to keep her eyes forward, but couldn't help scanning the crowd. Some smiled, some whispered, and a few looked openly bewildered. Jake waited for her at the altar. As their eyes met, he gave a slight nod, a silent, "Thank you." Lila reached the altar. The priest, an older man with round glasses, smiled. "We are gathered today to celebrate the union of Jake Thompson." There was a strange pause. The priest looked at Jake, waiting. "Lila Sanchez," Jake whispered quickly. "Lila Sanchez," the priest repeated. The ceremony continued. Lila barely heard the words. Her heart pounded so loudly she felt everyone could hear it. She glanced at Jake. He was pale but maintained a calm demeanor. When it came time for the vows, Jake took Lila's hand. She felt his hand trembling just as much as hers. "I, Jake Thompson, take you, Lila Sanchez, to be my wife," he said, reading from a note the priest held. Then it was Lila's turn. Her voice was low and shaky. "I, Lila Sanchez, take you, Jake Thompson, to be my husband." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest declared. "You may kiss the bride." Lila felt panic surge. No one had mentioned a kiss. Jake noticed her discomfort and gave her only a quick, chaste kiss on the forehead. The guests applauded. Lila and Jake walked together down the main aisle. She tried to smile but felt she might faint. When they finally stepped out the main doors, Jake held her arm. "You were incredible," he said. "I know that was hard." "That was the craziest thing I've ever done," Lila replied. "Just the reception now, some photos, dinner, and you're free, I promise." But before they could say more, Mrs. Thompson approached. She looked Lila up and down, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "You are not Chloe," she stated flatly. Jake tried to intervene. "Mom, now's not the time." "Who are you?" Mrs. Thompson asked, ignoring her son and staring directly at Lila. Lila opened her mouth, but no words came out. "How do you explain this? How do you lie to the mother of the man you just married?" It was Jake who improvised quickly. "Mom, I'll explain everything after the party, but please trust me right now. I need you to trust me." Mrs. Thompson looked at her son for a long moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, she nodded and walked away. Lila let out the breath she was holding. "Your mom knows." "She's suspicious," Jake corrected, "but we'll fix it later. Now come on, we have to go to the ballroom." The reception was at the Palmer House Hilton downtown. It was an elegant space with crystal chandeliers and tables decorated with white and gold flowers. Lila had never been to a place like this as a guest, only as a cleaner, mopping up after everyone else had left. Jake introduced her to a few people as his wife. Every time she heard that word, Lila felt a strange tightening in her chest. It was all a lie, yet something in the pretense made her feel things she hadn't expected. During dinner, Jake sat next to her. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," Lila replied honestly. "But I'll survive." "I owe you an explanation." "You owe me the other half of the money you promised," she corrected. "You can keep the explanation." Jake offered a sad smile. "Thank you. Even if you think I'm crazy, thank you for doing this." Lila looked at him. There was something genuine in his gratitude. Why did you do it? Why didn't you just cancel everything? Jake fell silent for a moment. Because I'm terrified of failing, he finally said. And canceling that wedding today would have been failing in front of everyone who matters to me. Lila didn't reply, but somehow she understood. The party continued into the night. There was cake, dancing, toasts. Lila did the bare minimum, always by Jake's side, and when it finally ended, it was well past midnight. Jake walked Lila to the parking garage. We'll meet tomorrow to arrange the annulment, but for tonight, you're free. He handed her an envelope. The rest of the money, as promised. Lila took the envelope and looked inside. $50,000 in cash. Coupled with the earlier transfer, it was $100,000, more money than she had ever seen. Thank you, she said, realizing she truly meant it. Thank you, Jake responded. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Lila turned and walked toward the nearest bus stop. As she waited, she gazed up at the Chicago night sky. The stars shone faintly over the brightly lit city. Lila didn't know it yet, but that day had changed her life in ways she never imagined. The next morning, Lila woke up thinking it had all been a strange dream. But then she saw the wedding dress hanging on a chair in her tiny rental room in Westtown. And the reality hit her like a punch. She'd married a stranger, or rather, pretended to marry one. Lila grabbed her phone and saw 3 messages from Jake. Morning, we can meet today at 10 a.m. at my lawyer's office. Sending you the address, 2050 Wall Street, Thompson Tower, 10th floor. Bring your ID and proof of address. We need them for the annulment. Lila replied simply, K, and started getting ready. 2 hours later, she was in the elegant waiting room of a law office. Glass walls, light wood, and business magazines on the coffee table. Jake appeared wearing jeans and a blue shirt. He looked exhausted. Morning, Ma, he said. Morning. They sat on comfortable couches, waiting for the lawyer. Sleep well? Jake asked, trying to break the silence. No, Lila replied. You didn't either. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Stern, finally called them in. They entered a room with a large conference table. Jake has informed me of the situation, Mr. Stern began, adjusting his glasses. You wish to annul the marriage? Yes, Jake and Lila said simultaneously. I understand, but I must inform you that annulment is not a simple process in Illinois. You would have to prove coercion, fraud, or some defect in consent. Just an act is not a legal defense. But it was just an act, an agreement between us. Legally, you are married, the lawyer explained. You signed the documents, correct? Yes, Lila said, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Then the fastest route is a no-fault divorce by mutual consent. It takes a minimum of 90 days here. It's straightforward and inexpensive. 90 days, Jake repeated. It can't be faster? Unfortunately, no. That is the minimum time required by law. Jake and Lila exchanged a look. Fine, Jake said. Let's file for divorce then. But then Jake's phone rang. It was Matt. Excuse me, Jake said, leaving the room to answer. Lila was left alone with Mr. Stern. May I offer a word of advice, young woman? The lawyer asked. Whatever happened yesterday, you both need to be careful these next few months. You are officially married. Anything you do can have legal consequences. Lila nodded, not entirely sure what to say. Jake returned with a tense expression. Lila, we need to talk alone. They left the office and walked to a corner coffee shop. It was a small, cozy place called the Bean Pod. They ordered 2 lattes and sat near the window. What happened? Lila asked. Jake took a deep breath. Remember that important investor at the wedding? Richard Cooper? He's about to invest $5 million in my company, but he's very conservative. He values family, stability, traditional values, and he was incredibly impressed by the wedding yesterday. He thinks I'm exactly the reliable kind of person he wants to do business with. Lila started to understand where this was going. Richard wants to have dinner with us this week, Jake rushed on. He and his wife want to get to know my wife better. He said solid marriages show solid character. You're insane if you think I'm going to continue this lie. I know it's a huge ask, but it would only be for a few months, just until we close the contract. Then we file for divorce and go our separate ways. Jake, this is going way too far. I'll pay you, he said, desperately. $200,000 more up front, plus $50,000 a month for the next 3 months. That's a total of $350,000. Lila felt herself sway in her chair. $350,000. It was an unimaginable sum. Why is this so important to you? Jake stared at his coffee. Because my company is everything to me. I started from nothing. I worked 16 hours a day for 7 years to build something worthwhile. This investment will take us to the next level. It will create jobs. It will make a difference. He looked at Lila. I know it seems like it's just about money and ego, but it's not. It's about not giving up on something I fought so hard for. Lila was silent. She thought of Leo, of the surgery he needed, of the overdue rent, of everything that $350,000 could solve in her life. I'd have to lie to people, but she said, to your family, to your friends. I know, and I'll understand if you say no. Lila took a sip of her latte. It was strong and bitter. If I agree, there are rules, she finally said. Jake nodded immediately. Anything you want. Rule 1, buddy. Nothing physical. We don't share a bed. We don't kiss, except for necessary public appearances. Agreed? Rule 2. Everything must be in writing in a contract. All obligations, all payments. Rule 3. After 3 months, we divorce and never speak again. We go back to our normal lives. Jake extended his hand. I accept all the rules. Lila looked at his outstretched hand. Then, against every instinct screaming at her to run, she shook it. All right, she said. Let's do this. The following days moved fast. Jake rented a larger, more convincing apartment in a better neighborhood. It was a 2-bedroom condo in the Gold Coast with a balcony and a nice view of the city. Separate rooms for privacy, Jake assured her. I need to get my things, Lila said. I'll help you. They drove together to the tiny room Lila rented. It was a brutal contrast. A 120-square-foot room with a small bed, a small dresser, and a shared hallway bathroom. You lived here? Jake asked, unable to hide his surprise. It's what I could afford, Lila replied with dignity. Jake remained silent as he helped her pack her few belongings into one suitcase. Lila, I didn't know. Didn't know what? That your situation was so tough. Lila stopped what she was doing and looked at him. Jake, you paid me $100,000 to pretend to be your bride. What did you think someone who accepts that was living? A fairy tale? He lowered his gaze. Sorry, you are right. They finished packing in silence. That night, Lila slept in a real bed for the first time in years. A comfortable mattress, clean sheets, a room all to herself. Yet, she couldn't sleep well, because now she wasn't just Lila Sanchez, the cleaner. She was Lila Sanchez Thompson. And that lie was just starting to create its own complications. The week flew by. Jake taught Lila the basics of his life, his parents' names, where he went to college, what his company did. Lila told him about rural Texas, about coming to Chicago for opportunities, about Leo and the accident. Any other siblings? Jake asked while they ate breakfast in the condo. No, just Leo. He's 25, recovering back home with my aunt. And your parents? Lila fell silent for a moment. My dad died when I was 15. Heart attack. My mom passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry, Jake said, and he sounded sincere. And your family? Lila asked, changing the subject. My dad's name is Robert, 61, retired accountant. My mom, Evelyn, who you've met, is 58, a retired elementary school teacher. I have a younger sister, Mia, in New York City. She's 30 and an architect. And Chloe? Lila asked, curious. What happened with her? Jake sighed. She sent an apology text, said she panicked, wasn't ready, but still loves me and wants to talk. And will you talk to her? I don't know, Jake admitted. It's all very confusing right now. Thursday arrived. It was the night of the dinner with Richard Cooper and his wife Margaret at the Alinea, a high-end Chicago restaurant. Lila was nervous. Jake had bought her a simple, beautiful dress that wasn't too flashy. Just be yourself, Jake said as he drove to the restaurant. They're normal people. They just want to know us. They're American millionaires, Lila corrected. I'm a cleaner pretending to be your wife. None of this is normal. Jake parked the car. Lila, you're smart and genuine. That's more than I can say for a lot of people I know. She looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he'd said anything like that. They entered the restaurant. Richard Cooper was a tall, gray-haired man in his 60s. His wife, Margaret, was elegant with a warm smile. "Jake!" Richard greeted him with a firm handshake. "And this must be your wife, Lila," Margaret said, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Jake has told me so much about you." They were seated. The restaurant was beautiful with modern, sleek decor. Soft jazz played in the background. The conversation started light. Richard talked about meeting Jake at a tech conference in Seattle. Margaret said she'd been visiting Chicago for over 20 years. "And you, Leela?" Richard asked. "Jake told me you have known each other for a while. How did you two meet?" Lila felt her heart race. She and Jake had prepared a story, but lying to real people while looking them in the eye was harder than she'd thought. "We met 2 years ago," she said, sticking to the agreed-upon script. "I worked for an events company. Jake hired the service for a product launch." "Love at first sight?" Margaret asked with a smile. Jake cut in. "Not exactly. It took me a few months to work up the nerve to ask her out. She was really shy," he lied. Lila even smiled. "It took him 3 events to finally ask for my number." Richard chuckled. "I was shy with Margaret too. It took me 6 months to propose after our first date." "6 months?" Margaret laughed. "It was 8. The conversation flowed. To Lila's surprise, she started to relax a little. Margaret asked gentle questions about Chicago, about life. Richard talked business, but in a way that even Lila could follow. Then Margaret asked a question Lila didn't expect. "And your parents, Lila, did they approve of Jake?" Lila felt a lump in her throat. "My parents have passed away," she said softly. A silence fell over the table. Margaret put a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, forgive me, I didn't know." "It's okay," Lila said. "It was a few years ago." Jake gently placed his hand over hers on the table. It was a small gesture, but it felt genuine. "She still misses them," Jake said, "especially her mom." Lila looked at him, surprised. He was adding a real truth to the lie. "It's true," she said. "My mom would have been very happy to meet Jake." Margaret dabbed a tear from her eye. "I'm sure wherever she is, she's happy for you." The dinner continued. They ate seared scallops, drank wine, and laughed at Richard's stories about his early years in business. At the end of the night, as they said goodbye in the parking garage, Richard pulled Jake aside. "She's special," he told him. "You chose well." Jake looked at Lila, who was chatting with Margaret a few feet away. "I got lucky," he replied, and a part of him wanted to believe those words. Driving home, they were silent for a few minutes. Then Jake spoke. "You were amazing tonight. Thank you." "They're good people." "They are. That's why I feel bad lying to them." Lila looked out the car window. "Sometimes I wonder if this will all be worth it in the end." "It will be," Jake said, more to convince himself. "It has to be." 3 weeks passed. Lila and Jake found a strange rhythm of cohabitation. She still worked a few cleaning gigs. She refused to stop. And Jake spent his days at the company. In the evenings, they often had dinner together at the condo and talked about their day. Slowly, something shifted. Jake began noticing small things, like how Lila always left the coffee ready before he woke up, how she read thriller novels before bed, how she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. Lila also noticed things, how Jake was always polite to delivery people, how he talked to his mom every Sunday, how he'd get frustrated when a programming code didn't work but never gave up. One night, 2 weeks before the 3-month deadline, they were eating a simple pasta dish Lila had prepared. "I learned this recipe from my mom," she said. "It's the only thing I can cook well." "It's delicious," Jake replied. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Jake spoke. "Lila, can I ask you an honest question?" "Sure." "Were you happy? I mean, in your life before all this?" Lila thought for a long time. "I don't know if happy is the word. I was surviving, trying to do the best I could. Were you happy with Chloe?" Jake put down his fork. "I thought so. But looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of marriage than with her. The idea of having everything perfect, planned out. And now, with all this? Now everything's upside down," he said. "But in a weird way, I feel more honest with myself than I have in years." Lila smiled faintly. "How strange. We're living a lot, but we feel more honest." Jake laughed. It's completely illogical. The following Saturday, Mrs. Thompson called Jake. I want you two over for lunch tomorrow. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Jake warned a nervous Lila. Your mom doesn't like me. She knows something's wrong. She just wants to get to know us better. It'll be fine. But Jake was nervous too. Lunch was at Jake's parents' comfortable home in Lincoln Park. Mrs. Thompson made a big pot of chili, cornbread, and iced tea. Sit down, Lila, Mrs. Thompson said, pointing to the chair next to hers. I want to talk to you. Jake and his dad, Robert, stayed in the living room watching football. It was clear Mrs. Thompson wanted Lila alone. Do you cook? Mrs. Thompson asked as she chopped onions. A little, not as well as you. Then help me with the cornbread. They worked side by side in the kitchen. Mrs. Thompson showed Lila how to mix the batter and how to tell when it was ready. You are not Chloe, Mrs. Thompson said suddenly. Lila froze. I know. You know that I know? Yes, since the first day. Mrs. Thompson kept working on the batter, then explained to me what's happening. Why did my son suddenly marry you? Lila felt her throat tighten. She could lie. She should lie. But something in the woman's honesty made her want to tell the truth. He paid me, Lila said softly, to pretend to be his bride when Chloe didn't show. I needed the money, and he needed to save face. Mrs. Thompson stopped working and looked at Lila. You're telling me this is all a lie? Yes, we're getting divorced in 2 weeks. Mrs. Thompson was silent for a long moment. Then she returned to the batter. And do you feel anything for him? The question caught Lila off guard. I don't know. You don't know or you don't want to admit it. Lila felt her eyes sting. Mrs. Thompson, I'm a cleaner. Your son is a successful entrepreneur. We live in completely different worlds. Different worlds don't mean different hearts, Mrs. Thompson said. I was an elementary school teacher. My husband was an accountant. We didn't have money, but we had love, and we still do. She placed a hand on Lila's arm. You're a good person. I see it, and I see how my son looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. How does he look at me? Like you're the first real thing that's happened to him in a long time. Lila wiped away a tear that escaped. But we have an agreement. This is going to end. Agreements can change, Mrs. Thompson said, if both of you want them to. A few more days passed. Richard Cooper called Jake with good news. The contract was almost finalized, just a few final details. You did it, he told him, and a big part of it is because I trust you. You have solid values, family, stability. Jake hung up, feeling hollow. He had gotten what he wanted, but at what cost? That night, he and Lila ate dinner in silence. The agreement was due to end in 10 days. The contract is almost closed, Jake said. Richard called today. That's great, Lila replied, but her voice held no emotion. Lila, Jake, you don't have to say anything. But I want to, he insisted. Because in the last 3 months, something has changed. Lila looked up at him. What changed? I changed. You changed. We changed, Jake. We had an agreement. I know, but what if I don't want to honor that agreement anymore? Lila felt her heart race. What are you saying? Jake stood up and walked toward her. I'm saying that these last 3 months have been the most honest of my life. I'm saying that I wake up and the first thing I think about is whether you've made the coffee yet. I'm saying that when you laugh, I want to make you laugh again. Jake, stop. You're confused because of everything that happened. I'm not confused. For the first time in years, I see things clearly. Lila also stood up, backing away from him. We live in different worlds. When this is over, you'll go back to your life and I'll go back to mine. What if I don't want to? But you will when the novelty wears off, when you realize I'm just a cleaner who has nothing to offer. You will. Do you really think that about yourself? Jake asked, his voice firm. That you have nothing to offer? That's not true. You're hardworking, honest, brave. You did the impossible to help your brother. You accepted an insane deal with a stranger because you needed to. You have more courage in your little finger than I do in my whole body. Lila felt the tears stream down her face. I'm scared, Jake. Of what? That this might be real? That I'm serious and that it'll end anyway? Jake took a step toward her. Then let's find out together. No contracts, no agreements, just the two of us, seeing where this goes. And the divorce? Let's leave it as is for now and see if this thing that started as a lie can turn into the truth. Lila looked into his eyes. She saw sincerity. She also saw fear. She saw everything she felt herself. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Me neither, but I want to try much. They stood there in the middle of the living room, only a few feet separating them, a distance that felt like miles. It was Lila who took the first step. She walked toward Jake, and for the first time since the fake kiss at the altar, they kissed for real. It was a nervous, doubtful kiss, full of questions, but also full of possibilities. When they parted, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Let's go slow, he asked. Very slow, Lila replied. In the following months, they rebuilt everything, not as a fake husband and wife, but as two people trying to truly know each other. Jake introduced Lila to Leo when he visited Chicago. Her brother instantly liked him. Lila met Jake's sister Mia, who flew in from New York specially to meet her. There were tough moments, fights over small things, and old insecurities that resurfaced, but they talked and kept trying. Richard Cooper closed the contract. Jake's company grew. He offered Lila an administrative job, but she refused. I want to do this my way, she said, without depending on you. And she did. Lila started an accounting course. She found a better job at a hospital cleaning service. She built her own life alongside Jake, but not dependent on him. A year and a half after that fake wedding, they were sitting on the same condo balcony where it all began. You know what's funny? Lila said. We've been married for over a year, but it feels like we're just starting. Jake laughed. It's true, maybe we should renew our vows. Do it right this time, with a real proposal. Exactly. So ask. Jake turned to her, taking her hand. Lila Sanchez, will you keep being married to me, for real this time? No contracts, no agreements, no lies. Lila pretended to think. How much are you going to pay me? Jake chuckled. Nothing. I can only offer you love, companionship, and probably a lot of arguments over what movie to watch. Sounds like a good deal, then yes. Lila kissed him. It's a yes. And there on the balcony of a Chicago condo, with the city lights illuminating the night and the distant sound of traffic, two strangers who became husband and wife by accident discovered that sometimes the best beginnings are born from the most improbable endings. Not every fresh start has to be perfect. Some are born of desperation, impossible deals, and decisions we never should have made. But right there is where life surprises us, transforming what was only survival into something worth living for. If this story grabbed you, comment below, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button to hear what happens next on Rich Hearts Revealed.